else to add, so let's get right into it. Android and iOS differences and comparison. So what are the targets for this webinar? It's a very big topic. We're comparing two different operating systems with a lot of options and therefore just some targets that we want to achieve. Give you an overview of the market, then also the usage of Android Enterprise in your business, and a little comparison. How does Android Enterprise compare to iOS? And then I would like to show you some additional use cases that are very specific to Android Enterprise, which are maybe not possible on iOS at the moment, and in the end, some recommendations. So let's get right started. What we often hear is from customers, should I use Android or iOS? And usually our customers started out with iOS. That was the market leader at the moment, some years ago, and it's also for a long time been the easier solution, let's say it like that, the one that you know exactly what you're getting. Some of our customers also adopted Android, Windows Phone 8.1 or Windows 10 Mobile, but definitely I think pretty much all of our customers did use iOS. Many of our customers, that's what we see when we talk to them, are still observing Android, how it evolves, if they should get into it, and some are hesitant because they mention security concerns, which today we really can't get too much into this topic. Let's just say it like that. There are enough ways to secure Android just as much as iOS. Just debate whether Android might be even more secure than iOS. I definitely don't go into this today because it's a huge topic as well. And in the end, it's really just a question. It's ready. We definitely recommend taking a look at it, implementing it. So why not use best of both worlds today? So instead of iOS or Android and this ongoing fight that you often also see with your private users, discussions, what is better, we'd rather have together iOS and Android. Use both, best of both worlds. So what's our background with Android? Actually, we are following Android's development basically since it's available for business use. And I personally have been using it at least since version 4 and use it in a business environment. It works, it still works, and it evolves quickly, and we are just very much certain that this will continue to evolve and it will be an important part of mobile work in the future. Not only this year, but basically every year we gave some updates about what's happening in the Android world. For example, this year at a breakfast event, we showed you some details about kiosk modes for Android and iOS, comparison as well, what are the options. Then we had a previous webinar not too long ago, Android Enterprise What's New, where we talked about the news, what Android has to offer. It was very detailed information about Android Enterprise, so if you are interested in more detail about Android Enterprise, maybe you want to review those slides, and of course feel free to ask us. And our upcoming event, Samsung im Unternehmen, which is definitely also focused on Android and Android Enterprise, will be held in June. So if you are interested in this topic, and I definitely recommend that you take a look at the topics, have a look and maybe register for the event. And while we don't have the topic yet for sure, and we're pretty sure what we will present, there will be something for Android as well at our innovation event this year. So let's get into the market share. I'm sure you've all seen these slides before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But what we see is, as always with statistics, it's kind of hard to say how accurate they are. But if you compare 5 or 6 different ones and they all generally go in the same direction, then I guess it's safe to say that they add up. So worldwide smartphone sales to end users by operating systems. In 2017, we see that worldwide Android is clear leader. Then we have iOS, and things such as Windows Phone, Windows 10 Mobile are within this other 0.something%. So it's really a market that is distributed between iOS and Android. What does it look like in Switzerland? Here it's more of an even distribution. iOS used to be the leader in Switzerland by far. Switzerland has always been very keen on iOS, and iOS adoption rate was very high. But in the last few years, it has lost more and more market share to Android, and there are some other OS that are always also present here. If we look at the device vendors, who is actually selling those, it's obvious Apple is the only one selling iOS devices, but who is selling the Android devices? We all know Samsung is big. That's the biggest one that everybody will mention when you talk about it. The next one that might come to mind is maybe Sony. HTC used to be big, maybe not so much anymore. Other companies like that are well known. But if you look at the market shares for that statistics now for Europe, Chinese companies are actually coming in quite fast. So Huawei is also one that you probably know by now. Xiaomi is a rather new one. They were for a long time only focused on the Chinese market, but now they're coming to Europe, to the US as well. That's why we have this incredible growth rate. They're growing so fast it doesn't even make sense to put it into percentage numbers. And another contender that we know from the past, Nokia, they also started branding their own phones again and selling Android devices, and they're also actually coming pretty strong and definitely also a very interesting solution to look at. So, iOS availability. I quickly went to Wikipedia and checked, hey, how many devices are there actually that we can use today, iOS devices? And you end up with exactly 21 devices. So you see lots of iPhones. After a while, we had these iPhone 5, 4, and so on. Then it started getting with the Plus. So the first two I kept as 6 and 6 Plus, and then that's a new thing. So they always offer two varieties, a big one and a small one, every year. Then we still have iPod Touch, the sixth last option available that supports iOS 11, some iPads, iPad mini, and now new, the iPad Pros. For the iPads, we did not differentiate between Wi-Fi and 3G, 4G models, but you see the point. So it's a very limited amount of devices. We have one vendor, so it's a very controlled environment. Now let's compare this to Android. If you go to, for example, GSM Arena, which has lots of information about mobile devices, you will see 881 devices for Android. So the devices flying by, that was actually only 70 out of those devices. That was, I think, a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, so I'm sure this number grew already quite a lot. If we include the last Android version, we get an additional 600 devices, and if we even go back further, one more time, we are at 1,000 devices. This is just to give you a kind of an overview of how different it is to compare iOS to Android, how difficult this makes it also for vendors to apply solutions that work on all devices, because it's just a magnitude of difference between the devices that are available. Now, this is the topic. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Android fragmentation. That's one of the fears our customers have, because they say, yeah, I want to make sure that all my users are always up to date, that they have security patches and so on. So I want to make sure that we have the latest versions available. It's definitely a valid point. And if we look at the statistics that we see here from Google itself, these are statistics from devices logging into the Play Store at Google. On a weekly basis, they collect those stats. We see that Oreo, the latest release, is actually somewhere around 5% at the moment. If we also include Nougat, the previous version, version 7, we are around 1/3 of the whole population. And this is definitely an issue that is very specific to the Android world, which is much better in iOS. And it's also one of the reasons why many of our customers were a bit afraid to touch Android, because they were not sure what they're getting into, how they can support this in the long term. Android fragmentation explained. I'll just show these slides real quick, maybe take some time later on to look at them. I thought that's a very nice explanation of why it's so difficult on Android. And here the slides are from Sony. They're explaining why they need so much work, why it takes so long to provide an update. And Sony is actually one of the few vendors that provides updates quite quickly and also updates their older devices. So maybe take a look later on if you're interested. So Android fragmentation challenges. Android is not only used in phones, tablets, it's also in wearables, TVs, and cars. And the latest one that we heard not too long ago, it's also going to be in Internet of Things as Android Things, which is going to be a closed system, not an open system. Only Google will update it. So this is just another family that Android will receive, and there's going to be probably lots of devices. We're very interested to see what's going to happen there. And this broad range of Android smartphones, if we now only look at smartphones, as we've seen before, there are hundreds of those, we have a lot of challenges for our business usage. For example, that every device is different. The buttons are not on the same side. Taking a screenshot is different between OS, between devices. Simple things like that can make life a bit harder from a business point of view. Then we have availability and usability of company apps. Are they available on all of my devices for all my screen sizes? Supportability, working in IT support with Android, we can agree on that. That's much more difficult than for iOS. And then the whole thing about end-use documentation. How do I present Android documentation for one device and make sure that other people can use it on other devices that look a bit different? So what is Android Enterprise? We need standardization for this big variety of devices. So Android Enterprise was launched in 2014 as Android for Work. It's developed by Google, built into the OS since Android 6. It has a dual persona approach. We'll see later on what this means. And you can install any app that you can find on your normal device, you can install into the work container. That's the basic idea. You have a managed Play Store. This is apps at work for Android Enterprise, basically. And you can easily, you have a high flexibility in distributing apps. What does it look like? So this is actually screenshots from my device that I use every day. That's how I work with my mobile device. So you see we have different apps in this work container. They all have this work badge. And you also notice that, for example, Chrome, I've got it 2 times, once in my work environment as a secured app and once outside of my work environment as a private app. And those are really 2 different apps with 2 different settings. They're not sharing any data between those apps. It's really separate. And this applies also to the camera, to contacts, to the Play Store, managed Play Store, to any other app that we install. SPB app, you see, we have 3 different versions here on this phone. So if you go to Play Store, the managed Play Store by Google, it looks like a normal Play Store. The user knows how to use it. It's very simple, but you only see those apps that the admin actually suggests for you. And then I noticed, okay, I would like to use Google's Calendar app, and okay, there's something wrong. My administrator has not accepted the permissions required for this item. So you can see the admin really has a very nice control of what apps are allowed inside this work container and who is allowed to install them. Now, one thing we all like about Android Enterprise, what's very specific about Android Enterprise, is that you can turn on and off work mode. You see it there in the lower right corner, work mode. If I click on off, it turns off the work mode, and what happens is I still have all of my apps available, but they're grayed out, they're not active. I won't receive any pop-ups from them. This is perfect if you want to go on holidays. You don't have to reset your phone or turn it off or unregister. You just click this button, and when you're ready, you click it again, and then you go back online. You start working again. So let's talk about how we can use Android devices in our corporate usage. This is what we see as the whole device management lifecycle, and today we go into a few of those topics because, as said before, it's a very huge topic. We cannot cover all of them. So what is Android like to deploy? There are different versions, options available, how we can deploy Android. The one that's most commonly is the one on the left, UIOD. So users have their own phones, they want to use it at work, and they want to register it. So we have this separate container that's on the device. That's what you saw before in those screenshots. But then we also have other options if the device is corporate-owned, if the corporate pays for it and distributes it to the user. It can be work managed, very locked down, not too many permissions available for private usage, or you can have even a lockdown kiosk mode where only certain apps, one app is displayed, or you can have this combination where it feels like almost a private device, but it's still owned by the corporation, by the company, and you have more options available. And some of those options are comparable to iOS. We won't go into too much detail on this slide. If you're interested, take a look at it later on. And it's just here to show you that any deployment option that's available on iOS, I'm sure we will also find a way on Android. Inventory configuration and policies, profiles, and so on. This slide, again, we could spend just a whole webinar only on things like that. What can we distribute? What are the specialties about distribution and so on? In general, we can say that anything that you would expect to be available on an iOS device will also be available on Android Enterprise. We can register the devices ourselves during over-the-air management. We can retrieve our inventory, we can send out, we can monitor OS versions, and we can enforce device encryption and so on. So a few of those are marked with an asterisk. That's where it gets a bit tricky. It's a bit different maybe than on iOS, but we always have a very nice solution that works almost the same. But those are the points where we sometimes have to discuss a bit longer with our customers what to expect and what's available for company usage. For example, remote and retire and wipe. Yes, we can retire Android Enterprise devices, but we can actually not wipe the devices if they're BYOD. If they're corporate-owned, we can wipe them. So that's just one of those things that you might have to know. The last point you see is SSO authentication to backends, which seems like a very small topic, but it's actually big enough and complicated enough. We have lots of interesting projects in that area that we have another slide for that, explaining a little bit the differences, because in the end you have apps on your device and you want to use them. The user just wants to have an easy-to-use device. He doesn't want to enter URLs, passwords, and so on. So we use for SSO authentication, we have different options available, single sign-on. We can use basic authentication, enter username and password once, and that's okay. Or we have maybe Kerberos constraint delegation, native Kerberos, something that is available natively on iOS, which is not available on Android. And there we actually, together with another company, we found a very nice solution, so we can enable native Kerberos for Android Enterprise. And that's called this Hypergate solution, and I'm sure you're going to hear in another webinar or somewhere else about this solution again. Just for now, you can know that there is a solution for that, and we are very glad to discuss the options. So yes, we do have Kerberos on Android phones. What about monitoring and compliance actions? If we take a look at the Mobile Iron slides here, and of course it doesn't matter whether it's Mobile Iron or any other MDM, we do have those compliance options available that we know from the iOS world. If something goes wrong, then we just remove all connections and all the corporate data. So we don't even have to talk too much about that. Also, you can just feel rest assured that this is available. We just remove everything that's that's business, and private parts on the device are not affected by these compliance actions. So if we compare those solutions, I put Android in the middle because that's kind of what it used to be, and it shows where Google did put some very important work into the solution to improve usability in a corporate environment. So of course Apple is very easy to implement. We have one vendor, one operating system vendor. It's a standardized distribution. There's one app store, and that's it. So that's a very easy to navigate solution. We know exactly where it starts and where it ends. While on Android, we've seen it before. Many device vendors, many different OS versions, a lot of fragmentation, and distribution of OS is not always guaranteed. We have different app stores from Amazon, Samsung, Google, and so on. And that's exactly where Google worked on it, and they made sure that they basically have one developer for the work part of Android. So the container that matters to you as an employee, it's one vendor, it's built into the OS, so there's nothing that Samsung or any others should or can change about that. If you know it's an Android 8 device, it's going to behave the same as any other vendor's Android 8 device. That's the target. And also from the App Store, you saw before, there's one managed Play Store. So manageability with EMM tools is definitely good for all of those solutions, but of course Apple iOS and Android Enterprise are very nice to handle. Supportability, we have to be honest, it's complicated. If you have 600 different devices, they look different. Users have different settings on them. All the settings then you might look a little bit different, so it's not as easy to support as iOS, but it's still definitely manageable. On the other hand, you have lots of customization. You can do many things that are not available with iOS. And that's what I want to show you today, just a little teaser what's also possible. For example, you know, help at work, that's this TeamViewer remote support and control that can be used on Android. It can also now be used with iOS. What's really nice about this TeamViewer remote support in help at work, in mobile line, on Samsung devices, you cannot actually only see what's happening on device, you can even click for the user, so the user doesn't even have to click anymore. You can do this as admin. Another solution that might be interesting, I showed it here on my Android mobile phone. You can use a mouse and keyboard and you actually receive a mouse pointer. And really this mouse pointer makes all the difference if you actually try to work with that device, especially in small things like Excel sheet or so. Suddenly it's very much easier to navigate or click on those little buttons if you have a mouse pointer. To do this, you can basically just hook up any Bluetooth keyboard or mouse to your device. Or you can also use USB. Samsung did take this concept a bit further, and we know they're not the first to try this. There was Continuum for Windows Phone and so on. But actually, I did see this solution in action. It's a very nice solution. Suddenly you have a desktop kind of experience, a full screen. You have different windows open, and you can move around, multitasking. It feels a lot like a desktop. So maybe this is a solution for people that are on the go often, and maybe once or twice per week they come back to the office, they have to do some office work, and instead of having to give them a PC, maybe it's enough to give them a cell phone. It's worth a try, say, maybe sometimes. And if we talk about enterprise optimized solutions, we have very interesting things with Zebra devices. There are also, many of those are based on Android, so we are talking about ruggedized devices. You can go out in the rain with them or use them in a warehouse. They have scanners modules directly implemented with a trigger button, so it's not like trying to hit a soft button on a smartphone. You can really feel the trigger. It works very flawlessly within your workflows that you already have, but it's based on Android. We can manage them, we can update them. It's a newer version of what you might have available with old Windows CE devices. And just also very interesting from my point of view is that, of course, Android being very open, and we're not even talking about any refrigerators or whatever other appliances might include Android as an OS. You can include different sensors in those devices. For example, a heat sensing sensor that Caterpillar put in one of their phones might be interesting if you're a plumber and you want to see where the hot water doesn't go through the pipe anymore, things like that. And one of our customers, they actually use this ToughPad. It has lots of connectors. You can connect HDMI, USB, all kinds of things, and they're actually connecting it to a docking station using a printer and a cashier system, and they're using this as a solution to provide services to their customers. So also if you have any questions in that regard, feel free to contact us. There's always very interesting solutions for that. So what are our recommendations for Android Enterprise? If you want to take a look at it, Android can be secured for business usage. Definitely don't worry too much about security. We can go into much detail about this, but in general, you can rest assured that that's not an issue. If you want to secure corporate data, we recommend that you do it with Android Enterprise, because in the future, beginning with Android 10, it will be the only solution available for EMM providers to secure corporate data. The one that some of you might use now, App Connect, will actually disappear over time. That's because Android is getting rid of old APIs, of old configurations that were available, and the new standard will be Android Enterprise. So if you use App Connect at the moment, you should maybe start planning Android Enterprise migration. Start taking a look at it, set your use cases, and make sure that everything works the way you expect it. If you do use BYOD devices, then you have to embrace fragmentation, because the BYOD devices, there will just be all kinds of different devices coming your way. And especially with Android Enterprise, this is not such an issue anymore as with App Connect. We had sometimes issues with very exotic devices, and I think Android Enterprise will also help there a lot to have a nice standard for all kinds of devices, and the brand, the model doesn't matter so much anymore. If you want to distribute corporate devices, then evaluate certain devices that you think they're working for my employees and test different deployment methods that we've seen before. Some of them are really close to what you can do with iOS and DEP, so automatic enrollment and staging options, where you can stage device within a couple of minutes without hardly pressing any buttons. makes it easy to distribute hundreds of devices very quickly. Thoroughly test your use cases. Usually that starts with email, PIM, and goes then maybe through intranet, file access, and so on. And it just makes sense to test it on different devices, different scenarios. As I said, it should work, of course, and we're always there to help if it doesn't. But it always makes sense to test it with different devices, because your IT support needs to know what's coming when they are starting with Android Enterprise, because it's a new system. It has its new special quirks that you have to know about, and your end users also need to know how to handle it. So maybe also provide training to your end users, provide new documentation, and so on. And of course, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at Nomasis. We do have many customers already using Android Enterprise, and I'm definitely sure that if you have any challenges, we will find a solution together with you. And so that's where we're at right now. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask right now.